First off, I want to say a big thanks to Davide and Paola, and of course the Italian consulate and Sergio for having us here. And I wanted to start by let's giving a big Seattle welcome to all of our Italian friends here. So let's get it amped up. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is really cool. This is really a cool experience to see Seattle be at a connection point here to Italy and all the innovation going on. And I gotta say, I'm torn here. I'm not sure if I want to be on the west side or the east side here. These wines sound so fabulous, and we're gonna get to that here soon enough, and we're gonna have a great time being able to connect with everyone and network. But before we get there, I just wanted to welcome our panel, and we're gonna have a great discussion here about everything going on in the world right now, and there's a lot going on. But I just wanted to start by, just watching the first 5 presentations there was really interesting for me. And I was sitting next to Martina, and we were kind of chit-chatting back and forth. And I was hearing some words that I don't typically hear in startup pitches of this stage, which was revenue and profits and cash flow positive and bootstrapped. And it really kind of stood out to me that there's a difference between what you see going on at Italy, at least in these first 5 companies I've seen so far, and maybe what we see here in Seattle. And so I want to open that up to the panel just in terms of what has stood out to you, just hearing those first 5 companies, and are my impressions off there, or did you also notice some differences right off the bat? And anyone can take that one. Martina? I know we were gossiping about it, so.
We were chatting, and I think for anyone, who's been investing on the West Coast over the last few years, is probably pretty refreshing to see some of that and the discipline and strong fundamentals that came through and the capital efficiency. So yeah, it definitely, and I think that's something that when you're outside of major markets and hubs where valuations get inflated and talent is really expensive, businesses are run differently. So that definitely came through in the pitches.
Yeah, Tom or Marcello?
Yeah, I think having run a startup in Italy, the system is actually very different. You don't have as much an abundance of capital like you do here. You look for capital really when you are profitable, because people want, Italy has a solid base of innovation and entrepreneurship, and it's gone through many, many years. It has the largest number of sort of small, medium-sized businesses, I think, in terms of percentage at least. And it's sort of something that's intrinsic in how you develop a business. It's like how much money you have is how much money is in the piggy bank, so to speak, and that's how you operate things. And I think that you'll probably see that with a lot of the startups. And you said the first 5, and I'm sure the next 5 are going to be like that. So it is very different. Yeah,
I mentioned to Martina, I think the words I whispered was old school. Which I love. It's like these are real
profitable
businesses.
Wow,
that's cool. Marcello, first impressions?
Are refreshing back to the fundamentals, I'd say, and also, for me, it kind of reminds me of our times back, in the startup world, where we had to generate revenue, and by generating revenue, you earn and you unlock the next step in funding as well, in order to accelerate your growth, not just to fabricate a somewhat artificial, right, scale that doesn't really exist before, testing it out to market and, seeing then the consequences.
I think there's also one important thing, and sort of Sergio touched on it as well. The Italian or the European system has a system of grants and things as well. And we were lucky enough in the Emilia-Romagna region to actually get a good grant and things as well for innovation, for R&D. And that's really a seed fund. Because if you can get like 500,000, 600,000 euros in funding that way, that gets you going, that gets you over the initial hump. The European Union obviously have just thrown a lot of money at Italy for the rebuilding, and if they use it correctly, I hope they're going to this time, it can help a lot of startups and really get it going. And then you can then look for your Series A, and that's when you go to the VCs. Could be local VCs, could be international VCs as well.
And I assume that's non-dilutive funding right off the bat, so that seems like really attractive.
Clean cap tables, love that.
It is. It's I don't say free money, you have to work for it, but it's a great way to get going, and it's a seed fund essentially. And it's better for international investors because you have, as you say, a better cap table.
Yeah. And let me say that our fellow Italians here know that, but for the our American friends here, that Italy has a century-long traditions of bootstrapping businesses, right? Italy, the 95% of Italian companies are, small and medium businesses, and they bootstrapped. They are, self-funded, and some of, all the greatest Italian brands and companies that you will know and love actually started, in garage, not from VC money, but from, the pockets of the founders and from the first customers.
Well, you're saying my favorite entrepreneurial word in bootstrapping, so I love to hear that. So let's talk about just customer acquisition. A lot of these entrepreneurs that are in the room today want to break into the U.S. market. They want to gain some of those U.S. customers. What are the hurdles for a company from Italy that's maybe in those startup stages to break in here and get that first customer as a validation mark? Go ahead, Tom. I know you've dealt with this a lot.
Yeah, I think getting first customers wherever you are is always a nightmare. Getting first customers away from home, from your home market, is hard. It's hard work. And I can remember when we were looking to do it, you have to really be polished. You have to work twice as hard because it's not just down the road. And having somebody that can help you do that is fundamental. And I think, today is a great example because if you've got angels or VCs that have those connections in these sort of the foreign market, so to speak, and help you get those first customers here, that's going to be critical. And Martina, I don't know. I would love to be invested by Martina because I think she's got a great fund and she's got a lot of great connections. How do you see it?
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, I do think, and I noticed that in some of the pitches too, that there is that strategic eye to finding the right funding partners, which I absolutely think is part of the equation. And I think whenever you're going into a new market, being able to, ideally you'll have some traction to build upon and have your value proposition really discreetly quantified for your customers, so understanding the ROI and understanding if those incentives align across market. Because what I've seen sometimes is, what works selling into one market might not actually be the same incentive structure in another country or even in some cases, another city. Certainly if you're crossing industries or anything like that. So I think just doing your research ahead of time, really understanding how the customer in a different context might differ and making sure that you're catering your pitch and your data accordingly so that you're really speaking to their needs very directly. And investors can also obviously be helpful with that if they have an understanding of that specific market.
Marcelo, yeah, any examples from your own career where you've
one
broken into those new markets?
One thing that I always repeat to the startups that I personally mentor and that I advise is that when they identify the VC, right, that they want to work with, actually money is the least important thing that they should go after, right? We are lucky enough, right, and we live in a day and age where money is relatively easy to find for the right ideas and with the right, premises.
Well, it was 2 months ago.
That was 2 months. Well, I think that the VC is still relatively healthy, right?
They're sitting on a lot of dry powder. I don't know if that's the same term in Italy. Dry powder, a lot of excess capital in the venture market still.
But it's the rest, right? It's everything but money that makes a difference, and really, finding the right fit from a cultural perspective, from an ecosystem perspective with the VCs that startup is working with, are critical. And from a personal, experience standpoint, I would say that for an Italian startup moving to a foreign market and the US, it's really super important to identify what they call the cultural gap and bridge that gap, right? Both what customers are looking for is different. And also what the financial ecosystem is looking for.
Can you expand on that? What is the cultural gap? Like where do people break down on coming to Italy from the US?
Well, I can make an example, right? If we're looking about customers and the way that typically you approach, a B2B sales life cycle, right? An American enterprise is much more focused on understanding their ROI and understanding, what type of return they will get on their investment on your product. In Italian or European customers is kind of less prone to taking the risk of on investing, right? And so the ROI discussion is going to be probably coming later in the stage of the negotiation interaction with the customer.
And they're looking at the technology. In
Exactly.
Europe, they look at the technology, the guts of the technology. Here, it's more about the business. And my advice to any Italian startup looking to come into the US, get the US people to do your marketing for you. Europeans, we're not very good at marketing. Let the US do it. Because that's that cultural difference. And it's like with the sales side and the business development side, you need someone from the US to do it. We can't do it very well, and it's really hard. In Italy, we need to focus on the technology side, the development, that side, the sort of ideas around it, and let the sales and marketing run over here. It's what I see very often are companies trying to come over here. They bring someone from Italy that's great in Italy, but really struggles on the sales side because it is a different business.
Of course, none of the companies that have pitched so far I would throw into that category. These have been really, really solid and tight pitches. Great stuff so far, and looking forward to the next 5. Martina, I don't think you've invested in Italy, but I know you've done a lot.
I haven't, and I admitted that on the
Are you going
call.
to today? Are you going to make a commitment today?
We'll see what happens.
Okay. After a few glasses of wine, maybe. So I do want to ask you, you have done a lot of overseas investing, though, and I'm curious, as you look at companies in Europe or in other markets, is there a different criteria that you set up and look at when you are thinking about investing in a company that might not be in your backyard?
Yeah, this is an interesting question to think about. And where I landed is I don't think the criteria for the company necessarily changes, but the diligence process changes pretty drastically. And a lot of that is that if I'm not familiar, or any investor you're working with is not familiar with the jurisdiction, we're going to need to do more research on the ecosystem and any potential regulatory friction, and just really understanding the full context for where the startup's being built, what the talent pipeline looks like, what those costs typically look like. And so that sometimes just takes a little more time depending on that level of familiarity. So if you are looking for a more expedient process, I would look for investors who have made those investments before, because they are likely up to speed. Or what we've done in many cases is partner with funds on the ground, or even funds here that have done investments where we can work very closely on that diligence process and share information to speed things along. But I think at the end of the day, the criteria we're thinking about for the company is pretty similar. And I'm a very early stage investor, so a lot of our diligence comes down to the people, and we'll do things like off-book references in diligence, which sometimes can be a little harder if you have that geographic gap and maybe not as much overlap in network. But we figure out ways to get that done. It just takes a little more time.
I'm going to ask you a question, Martina. I don't know if I'm allowed to do that, John.
Yes, I love this. Of course.
Is it important that there is a US entity that you invest in, or would you happily invest into the Italian legal entity?
So in our case, it is. We do require a U.S. entity. I don't think that's true of every fund and every investor, but we do. In all of our overseas investments, we have a U.S. entity.
Thank you.
So in terms of investing overseas, Tom, let me keep it with you. Do you think there are ways that U.S. investors could spend more time in a place like Italy, and what would that take for the Seattle investment community, the Silicon Valley investment community? What's that?
Pasta.
Pasta. Well, they got plenty of that. There should be billions flowing then. Pasta and wine.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that Italy offers a lot that would be great for the investment community. You can get 3 or 4 engineers for the cost of one US engineer, and I would say probably at exactly the same level. I can speak from experience from the team that moved over here when we were acquired. All our engineers are still in Microsoft. They've all been promoted. They're all doing really well. We took new graduates straight out of the University of Bologna, and they flourished. And so this is my sort of thing I like a lot at the moment is I really believe that rather than offshoring a lot of sort of development off to India or other places in Asia, that Italy is one of the best places to do it. You have a stable workforce. People don't get up and leave. I can remember when I was running a team in India, you didn't know if they were working for you until they turned up that morning because they can change. You don't get that in Italy. You get a quality of sort of engineers that go from mechanical, electrical engineering, software development, which is second to none. And so you can really get more bang for your buck by investing in Italy, Greece, places like this that really have these this heritage of sort of development on this side of things. That's where the trick is. If you can get a great idea from Italy, where you've got the R&D and the engineering kept there. You can bring the sort of commercial side over to the US where the market is. I mean, for me, that's the winning formula. And so investors over here, if they can see those good ideas and start investing like that, and then become experts, you do one investment, then you get the network, then you get the second, the third, or whatever, and it just becomes sort of a momentum that keeps on going. So I think there's so much untapped talent there that for any investor that wants to start looking at that, it's a great potential.
Marcello, any thoughts? What would it take for U.S. investors to spend more time and capital in Italy?
I think that it's important to go past the buzzwords, right? We know Italy is famous for wine, fashion, style, whatever, right? But there's so much more than that. I like to remind, right, that engineering and many other scientific domains, I've seen Italy protagonist in the past decades and the past century, and as we saw, right, from the examples today, right, this is the result of a heritage, right, and a legacy that has been going on for a while. And so, going past the appearances and see where Italian companies are really excelling today and where making a difference in the business world is super important.
Yeah, and I'm going to keep it with you for a second. Tom mentioned the idea that maybe Italian startups aren't as strong in marketing. Do you see any real differences between Seattle entrepreneurs or U.S. entrepreneurs and Italian entrepreneurs?
I disagree with Tom here, in the sense that I don't think that there is a cultural gap, right, in marketing skills. I think that the main challenge for Italian startups and companies that are marketing themselves in the US is that they tend to limit themselves to translate their marketing material and not to localize that marketing material. And again, this goes back to what I was saying earlier on, right? That there is a cultural gap that needs to be bridged. And it's not just about translating Italian into English, but it's about really capturing what are the business drivers that are top of mind for American investors, customers, prospects, and so on, and really distill them right into their marketing material. And I think that today we see good examples of what are the results that can be achieved when this localization process actually happens. I think that the same can be said about sales, and it goes back to it's a different business world. There are different business drivers. The way that investments from customers are performed is different, and those nuances and differences need to be appreciated, acknowledged, and integrated right into the strategy and execution of that strategy.
Are there natural areas where we've talked a lot about building bridges here? Are there natural areas where Seattle could build bridges to Italy and vice versa? And what are those maybe potential synergies that we have?
I mean, just from seeing the first few pitches and the things that come up, and this is for those of you who know what I invest in, know I'm wired this way too, but I certainly think we have a very robust gaming community here, a lot of exciting things happening in it. And then there's also the metaverse connection, which I think it sounds like there's a lot of activity in Italy as well. And despite those spaces being huge opportunities and being fairly well developed at this point, there's still always a need for more talent and new perspectives, fresh ideas, and so I think that's a place that really jumped out to me as I was listening.
Well, the metaverse should just be able to connect us seamlessly,
Exactly.
right? You haven't figured that out yet. But
Pasta doesn't taste quite as good in the metaverse.
that's right. Working on taste technology. Tom or Marcello, any natural bridges that you see between Seattle and Italy?
There's sort of obviously we're a massive tech hub here with the two largest tech companies in the world, and they've both made huge commitments around sustainability. Now, there is a lot of talk around sustainability. I do think that Italy and Europe has a good advantage in that essentially because of the government laws and things coming in, and obviously the Ukraine crisis has accelerated everything there as well. If there is a way to marry that sort of tech ambition that there is here in Seattle with the innovative ideas and things that are coming out of Italy and Europe, I think that would be a great way forward. And obviously, as Martina says, there's the metaverse and things like that. The metaverse needs to be localized, not translated. That could be another opportunity.
I want to mention, something that is less sexy, right? But But I want to give a shout out to the unsexy world of manufacturing and heavy industries, right? Seattle has a long tradition, right, of manufacturing in transportation, aerospace, and so on. Italy as well, right? The same. And I think that that's an ideal bridge, right? That, as Sergio knows, right, has been already kind of explored in many occasions. And the other that I would mention is building bridges not only from a business to business perspective, but also from an education perspective, right? The Pacific Northwest has a strong tradition, right, of higher education with university and so on. Italy, as well, and really bringing together those two, academic communities is going to be, really key to foster the next wave of innovation.
Well, I was just speaking to Ken Hornstein of Pack Ventures, who's here today, and he informed me that the University of Washington is the only U.S. school that has a branch campus in Rome tied to, in central Rome. Like, it sounds like this amazing experience. So it seems like there's some pretty interesting synergy that could just be built between the UW and that community in Rome. So very interesting experience. And he does speak Italian. He's looking to connect with some Italian friends here today. So make sure you hook up with Ken. So kind of the big elephant in the room, and since we have a really interesting panel here, I'm just kind of curious how everybody's thinking about the economy right now and where it's headed and how you're thinking about the economic conditions and how that's impacting your investment philosophy right now. Has it changed? What are you seeing? Are you freaked out? Scale of 1 to 10, how worried are you?
Well, back to where we started this conversation. I actually think now more than ever, startups, well, not more than ever, I should say more than a year ago, 2 years ago, business fundamentals really matter, and capital efficiency matters, and people are looking for startups that have figured out some degree of product market fit and have meaningful traction, have been very thoughtful about their approach and very lean. And so I think some of the values we talked about early on in the current market will really resonate and help startups to be more competitive in seeking funding. So I tend toward optimism. Certainly this is going to be a rough time ahead. I won't assign a value to just how long this might last, but I think it's going to be a while. And so I think those companies that are coming from a very disciplined and grounded place are much better positioned to succeed. And ultimately, I think the long-range view is this is when we see the best innovation as investors. I'm very excited to be deploying early-stage capital in the next year, 2 years, because I think the companies that come out of this time that can sort of come through the crucible and figure out how to scale are some of the best companies. We've seen this in previous cycles as well. So based on the pitches and sort of the values we've been discussing, I think there's a strong foundation to build on there.
Tom?
I'd say these correction periods are always interesting. Correction in the expectations that you don't go out and just say, I have a great idea and here's $100 million check. So that's going to change in expectations. Good companies will always get funded. I'm convinced, as we were talking earlier, there's a lot of dry powder around that needs to be invested. So if you have a good idea, you may not get the valuation that you thought you were going to get sort of a year ago or whatever, but that's not a bad thing. What I'm more worried about, though, with the economy sort of in this turbulent time, is that the underrepresented founders are not going to have the courage or the sort of financial backing to be able to go and innovate and step out and start their own business. That's really worrying because they're underrepresented founders have difficulty anyway. They are naturally sort of disadvantaged to start with, and really, if we can't sort of embrace them, enable them to really sort of have this pathway to get capital, where it's critical that they get capital, then that's going to be a problem, and that's going to set us back several years. I mean, Martina's been incredibly active in this space and done a fantastic job, but how is that going to stop? I don't know, Martina. You're the better person to speak better than I am.
I mean,
think,
one encouraging data point there is, I think it was just last week, PitchBook released a report. They do an annual report called All In about the state of female founders specifically. It's just one slice of the underrepresented groups you're talking about. But in 2020, we did see a big step back with the pandemic. The numbers went in the wrong direction. And it was a big setback for those of us who are thinking about gender equity in investing. But we actually haven't seen that happen yet in the current climate. And it's early, so we don't have a whole lot of data yet. But this year, there's been a decline across the board. But what we're seeing with women-led companies is on par with the rest of the market. It's not outpacing. So I'm encouraged by that. But absolutely, it's somewhere we need to be paying attention. And I think there are more resources and funds explicitly focused on different groups of underrepresented founders that will help, but that's not a solution in itself. So it is something that I'm going to continue to watch closely.
I have enough white hair in my face to give away the fact that this ain't my first rodeo. I actually started my career right after the dot-com bubble popped. I moved to the startup world right after the Great Recession of 2008. And so my personal experience is that with the struggles of these times come the opportunities, right? And crises typically are great equalizers, and this is where typically innovation happens, right? So I'm actually looking forward, right, to see what great new companies and great new ideas, right, will be invented as a consequence of the next phase that we'll be living. So I'm very optimistic.
Absolutely. Well, before we wrap, I just want to give each of you an opportunity to use a word or a phrase that you think embodies the Italian entrepreneurial spirit. And Marcello, I'll start with you. When do you think of the Italian innovation ecosystem? What comes to mind?
Well, I'm stealing something that Tom came up with many years ago, right? And there is a catchphrase, right, that was popularized in the 80s by Madonna. That was "Italians do it better." And I think that, in business, right, I think that is still true.
I don't think that's what Madonna meant, but... all right.
John, definitely she was thinking about business to business.
That's right. All right, Tom.
I think probably the one word that always strikes me about the Italian entrepreneurial system is creativity. That is what I always admire in my Italian colleagues or people I've worked with. It's the ability to find a solution. When there's a brick wall in front of you, find a way around it, jump over it, whatever. The Italians will find the way to do that. And that's great.
And Martina?
So this is related and maybe a bit cliche in the startup world, but the word that came to mind when you asked that was scrappy. And I think there is a real scrappiness that we've seen today, and in the best possible sense, being able to get it done and do that efficiently and really with an eye to building a strong business is great to see.
Well, thank you so much. Let's hear it for our panel, Martina, Tom, and Marcello.
Thank you.
And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Davide and Paola, and thank you for being part of PRIMO INNOVARE.